I have talked about several things in history that would show evidence of things coming from outsiders talking about Africa. But remember, there is a history within Africa talked about by actual Africans and not other people. The first one I showed were paintings, right? Obviously, there's still writings. I showed that with the people of Mali, and I also showed it with the people of Ethiopia and Egypt. But there's still other things that we can show that will depict for us the histories of African culture. And one of those is oral culture or oral history. Oral history, depending how long ago it was, can be very enlightening in a situation. For example, if you take Shaka Zulu, right? A lot of what the white people were saying about what he did was unquestioned for a long time, and people didn't know how to square the circle of the reality versus the exaggerations until they compared the information of those Europeans with the African oral history and the things they matched. We could say, okay, at least they're coming from multiple sources in a real way, not just having multiple sources from the same culture, but multiple sources in different culture. And a lot of the things that were written down, we just assumed they were made up if you couldn't find them anywhere else. Because, of course, if a person is bringing tyranny to a nation, but the people who lived in that nation do not feel that, then they cannot, in real life, be said to have been brought tyranny. Now, some people downplay oral history because it's not writing, but people do realize stuff like slavery, for example, or anything like that, is going to remain in your culture for a long time. So maybe 300 years as oral history. Now, when you get too far back, you can lose that information. And of course, oral history is not to be as trusted as something written down that is unchanging over the years. Now, something written down is not to be trusted at all if the writer is too biased. For example, we have some ancient Romans and Greeks that historians know were writing to butter up Greece, make Greece feel better, or make Rome feel better, or make Egypt feel better. Or we have complete misconceptions like Cyclopea, where the those type of Europeans believed that that area was created by the Cyclops because of how big the bricks are. And then, of course, you get all kinds of oral history that is not true. One obvious example of this was the story of Degder and Zwanende, and that their stories were so similar because remember, these were the two ogress women that I read, and their stories were very, very similar. And they started with something very simple, which is they're called long something. For example, the Zulu version is called long toe, and then the Ethiopian one, the Somalian one, is called long ear. Degdere means long ear, and that already starts this similarity of their stories. But I'm not going to read the whole thing again because I already put it in another video. Uzembeni was a great woman. She had two daughters, but she devoured the men of the country where she lived until she had destroyed them all. She ate the men and game. She killed man together with deer and boiled the flesh of the man and the flesh of deer together. It came to pass that when men were utterly consumed, there were left herself and her daughters. The summary of these stories was there was an ogress who killed everything in her sight that was male or animal or plant until things would deplete and she had nothing to eat. And then all of a sudden, she stumbled on some new food to eat. Her daughters, not being cannibals themselves, protect these people from her own mother, and then they destroy their own mother. In both cultures, that's the exact same story. Now, I can upload the original just so that we can all be sure that we're reading the exact same thing, but that's what it basically says. This is only one story. There's like tens of stories that I could bring up that are the same in both the cultures of those places, which shows you how long oral history can last within nations. And especially stories like that, which are probably told over and over again. You probably don't lose something like that very easily, given that it's probably a cautionary tale type of thing. And cannibalism in Africa did happen. We know that it happened not only due to oral tradition, but we actually have other things like chewed up bodies or whatever, not fleshy bodies, but also it happened in modern history in terms of like some cultures engaged in it. We know that people engaged in it all over the world, but some people in Africa, I forgot, I think maybe the Bangala also engaged in it, but there were some cannibals all over Africa at one point. So a lot of these stories are probably based around real life, and the cautionary tales are against certain populations that would do something like that. To find a story that is this similar between two cultures that people consider, think about it, those are Afro-Asiatics, the Somalians, and these are Bantu people. There shouldn't be a similarity. Also, their story goes way back, and again, in the Zulu tradition, it's mainly passed down by oral tradition. And so, my point that I'm making for you guys is do not discount oral tradition. When I show you European sources, I'm not telling you that that is the highest order of information. I'm just showing you that even Europeans agree at the lowest common denominator. So I want you guys to prepare yourself for me to use oral tradition as evidence. The only reason why I'm doing this video is so that I can begin an intro into looking into African history by Africans. But let's leave it here. I will re-upload the Degdere versus Zwanende story, long toe versus long ear story, so that you know exactly when I say that those stories are exactly the same. I want you to look at them yourself and tell me. By the way, can you guys comment in the comments so that you can overwhelm anybody who's negative? But not only that, I want you guys to write one if you remember the story I'm talking about, or two if you don't, so I know whether or not I should upload the video. One meaning I remember, two meaning I don't remember.